Hi, I'm Leisha Meehan at St. John's Law.
And my name is Matthew Saul, and I'm over at Villanova Law.
And we're here today to talk to you about the law school admissions process. If you have any questions during our talk, please just type them in and we'll try to get to them while we're live. And if we don't, we'll just respond later offline. Matt, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, so I will just kind of jump right in and talk about the law school admissions process in general. So there are about 205 ABA-approved law schools out there right now. And many of them have similar applications. So wherever you're looking to apply, you're going to have to go on to lsac.org and complete an application. They might look similar, but as we all know, there are going to be different components in each, different requirements, deadlines, timelines, so it's really important to read the instructions. However, there are pretty universally standard components to each application. So for each school to which you're looking to apply, you're more than likely going to have to complete a personal statement. Now, for many schools, this is an open-ended prompt. If you're a freshman or a sophomore in college, it's very similar to that common essay, although there are some schools that have a specific prompt that you have to write to. There's going to be, obviously, your academic transcript for wherever you're attending undergrad. There's also going to be the standardized tests, so either that's going to be the law school admissions test, or Lsat, or the GRE. On top of that, you're going to have a resume, and then, of course, letters of recommendation. So those are going to be the primary required components for the majority of law schools in the entire country.
So first, we'll start off with the standardized tests. What happens is generally you have to register with the Credential Assembly Service, which is part of LSAC. So if you haven't made an account with LSAC, go on lsac.org and do so. It's free to make an account with them. You will have, if you take the law school admission test, your scores will automatically pop up on your Credential Assembly Service report. If you take the graduate record exam and you apply to a school that accepts those, you have to have those scores from ETS sent directly to any law school you're applying to. The Lsat is the primary test for law school admission. Every law school in the country accepts it. Currently it's offered 6 times a year, but next year it was just announced that it'll be offered 9 times in a year, so there is more availability. The timing of the tests have changed from past years, so make sure you look online and see when it's being offered. Generally, most students need at least 2 to 3 months to adequately prepare for the Lsat or the GRE. It's not something you should ever take without having prepared, because every score you have will be included on your score report for 5 years. So there's no way to delete that or to get a score to not count if you sit for the test and you haven't canceled it. So keep that in mind, that you should never take the test unprepared, and that you really should be looking at these calendars 9 months to a year in advance to make sure you plan out when you can take that test and when you have the time to adequately prepare for it.
And then I will kind of jump right into the GPA and the transcript. So wherever you have attended your undergraduate, if you've transferred in from a community college, if you have credits from, say, high school that you took either through AP or IB courses, or you went to a college and took a few classes and earned college credit, you're going to have to submit transcripts to LSAC in this compiled credential assembly service like Elsa was just talking about. And it's important to note that when we're reviewing applications, we're not just looking at the overall GPA. And what your institution, such as St. John's or Villanova for our respective undergraduates, reports as the GPA, LSAC computes the GPAs a little bit differently, because all of these different colleges and universities compute GPAs differently. Some don't have A pluses, some are on a 4.0 scale, some have higher scales. So this is a tool to allow law school admissions offices to really assess candidates apples to apples. And then it's important to note that we're looking at every single semester, not just the GPA number itself. You know, a 3.5 at one institution or for one candidate can be made a lot of different ways. You can take a lot of introductory courses in your senior year. You could have taken very challenging courses. There's different majors out there, and there's no one major that's going to best prepare you for law school. So it's important to note that we're not just looking at your GPA as a whole or as a singular number, but we're looking at the full breadth of your academic experience throughout your undergraduate career and potentially any advanced degree that you may have received.
Mm-hmm. And so we call those that GPA that LSAC computes that Matt was just mentioning the cumulative GPA, and it's cumulative of all college courses you've taken. So keep that in mind, because sometimes it is disappointing to applicants if they feel like it's not matching up to where they graduated from.
Hey, Matt, we have a question from Shayla about transcripts.
Okay.
It sounds like she might have community college classes, but after receiving an undergraduate degree. Do schools or does LSAC want to see those as well?
Any academic credits that you've earned will be reported. However, any credits earned after you achieved your bachelor's degree won't factor in to your cumulative GPA. However, we will look at that, especially if, say, you're a few years out from your undergraduate experience and maybe you took a few classes. Maybe you didn't have the best GPA in undergrad and now you're working full-time and have been for a few years and wanted to take some classes to kind of get deep dive right back into that academic environment. So that is something that we'll assess, and it's something that we'll weigh in the application review process, but it won't factor into that cumulative GPA.
Great, thanks.
Do you want to go into personal statements?
Yes, and Sheila's my mother name, so I thought that was my mom asking that question. So yeah, the personal statement I find to be one of the most impactful resources and tools that you have in the application process, because if you really think about all those components I mentioned earlier of the application, your personal statement is your one opportunity or one of your few opportunities to really show your voice and tell your story to the admissions office. Unless you have schools such as ourselves that have these formal interview programs, this should be treated as your informal interview. And I think it's important when thinking about what you may want to talk about in your personal statement, if it is open-ended, to really think about the things that you shouldn't talk about. Because there are so many great personal statements, so many stories that you could write about, overcoming adversity, personal achievements or highlights, inspirations in your life, that I think it's better to address the things that I find to be kind of missteps in the process. Okay. So first and foremost, the one that always comes to mind is sort of what I call the kitchen sink. It's one they try to throw everything at you. You have all of these stories, all of these things that you want to communicate to the admissions committee. However, you only have roughly around 2 to 3 pages for the majority of law schools to write this. So I feel like sometimes you try to talk about too much that you never really go in depth or are really able to address 1 or 2 points that may have stood out to us. The other thing tends to be what I call the resume or transcript rehash. You have a lot of internship experience or extracurricular activities, and you end up just talking about your resume or all of the different political science courses or other courses that you took that we didn't learn anything new that we couldn't have found out through reading your resume or your transcript. So it's a missed opportunity because we're not really learning anything new about you. And the last one I find to be is many times students will have inspirations, reasons as to why they're wanting to pursue the legal profession. And sometimes that could be a family member or a role model that they have, and they end up talking about them so much that we really want to omit that person. And we know so much about their inspiration, but they fail to talk about themselves. So we sometimes want to omit grandma, but not necessarily the candidate because they're not telling us anything new about them. So those are just 3 common missteps I see, but personal statements, they are, you can write about any range of topics. And I think what makes it difficult, especially for an open-ended prompt, is finding out what things you want to communicate and what do you think will stand out to an admissions committee.
Yeah. And I would add to that, to make sure it's well written. It's something you shouldn't write the night before you're about to submit. You should start it 2 or 3 or 4 weeks ahead of time and really come back to it several times. Have someone else in your life read it, and just make sure that you are giving it the time and attention as a writing sample that you can. Also, when Matt was talking about it, it is my favorite part of an application to read.
Mine too.
And I even was thinking about in preparing for today all of the statements that I read last year and some of my favorites that were coming to mind. And for example, one was from an NFL player, but his story was not about how much he loved the NFL. It was actually how he felt like a piece of meat and how he had developed his brain in college and he had so much more aspirations. And one from a bluegrass musician, and I knew nothing about bluegrass music. And so I think you would probably agree that we actually end up learning a lot about different areas of life, not just the person, but things we never knew. So for about 4 to 6 months, when we are hundreds of applications deep,
if not thousands,
that is actually like the thing we most look forward to. So we appreciate you putting the time and attention into it. It deserves.
So Michaela has a question about this, and I think you've answered it, but I'm going to ask her a question.
Okay.
And then Matt, believe it or not, we have another GPA question, so we'll go back slightly. But Michaela asks, would you recommend writing about a specific area of law and or school-specific program in the personal statement?
No. On the St. John's application, we separately have a question where you could write 2 or 3 or 4 lines about why you want to go to St. John's. But the only exception I would say is if you want to end your personal statement, if it's about the reason you want to go to law school and you want to tie in a clinic or a professor here you want to study with, that would be fine, but don't feel like you're having to do that to make it fit into the essay. The piece of writing should stand on its own.
And I would say, I would say for Villanova, there's not a specific section that you can write why Villanova, and I think that may be true for other law schools out there. However, just make sure if you are including why X school, why St. John's, or why Villanova, that you are genuine in your interest. And also be sure that your writing is your own. Many times I have seen in reviewing applications when someone writes about why they want to attend Villanova, they may mention a clinic or a program, but the wording looks oddly familiar because it's the copy that I wrote that's on the website. So just make sure if you are genuinely passionate about pursuing a JD at a particular institution, that you're being honest with yourself and to the admissions committee and saying really why are you applying to X school or Y school. And it can be helpful, especially if there are no ties to this area, if you're from afar and nothing in your application signals an interest to attend one of our respective institutions. Sometimes it can give us a better understanding as to your reasonings for wanting to attend St. John's or Villanova.
So one quick GPA question. Is there any way for someone to figure out how LSAC is going to recalculate their GPA prior to going through the process? And then 2, we did have somebody who jumped in a little bit late and was hoping that you could repeat the common mistakes again. I think you had talked about 3 common mistakes. So we had the GPA question and then the common mistakes.
I'm going to turn the GPA question to you because I don't remember.
So what Leisha mentioned at first was this CAS report, or the Credential Assembly Service Report. And it's a 1-page report that all law schools will see. It will tabulate your GPAs from semester to or year to year from institution to institution. And it also will include your Lsat scores from over the past 5 years. So in every law school candidate will have access to that 1-page report so you can find out what your cumulative GPA is. You can't do it before you apply or before you pay for your credential assembly service, so there's no way to find out beforehand. But once you are committed to applying to law school and pay for that CAS report, you do have access to it.
Yeah, and LSAC should describe on their website for you all exactly how they do it. We know they include every college class, and even if your school allowed you to retake a class to drop a D or an F, they count the D or the F. So they count every college class, so you have to think about it that way. You can't calculate it on your own, but you can know problem areas that you might have on your transcripts.
And the same thing for withdrawals as well. They may be punitive or may not be punitive at your institution, but they are punitive with LSAC. With regard to the personal statement, I'll just quickly mention the don'ts. There is the resume or transcript rehash where you're talking about everything in your resume and your transcript But remember, those are components we can already see, so we're not really learning too much about you. There's the inspo, or the inspiration story, where you talk, the entire length of your personal statement is talking about your inspiration and not yourself. And the other one is sort of the kitchen sink, where you have so many things that you want to talk about, and you end up doing that, and it doesn't end up giving us too much information about one or two particular areas.
So, question just came in about optional essays.
Oh, great. Yeah, so we're going to talk about it anyway.
Oh, perfect.
But we can talk about it now. So it is important to read the directions for every school you're applying to. The way LSAC has it organized, certain sections of the application will automatically flow into all your applications if you filled them out that way. But you still have to read the directions for every school because every school is different. At St. John's, we do invite folks to submit an optional statement. It should be 1 to 2 pages, and it's usually about something that they've overcome or anything else they want the admissions committee to really know about. But some schools might have specific reasons why you would submit an optional statement. So the important thing would be to just read that school's description to make sure you're doing it properly, but also to not repeat your personal statement. Mm-hmm. Just because you had something amazing or something tragic happen in your life doesn't mean you write the same essay twice about it. So the optional statement should be on a completely different topic than the personal statement.
Yeah, and I will just piggyback onto that. With regard to what I just mentioned about the personal statement, the kitchen sink, this is the sort of the solution to that. Your optional essays or statements can really allow you another opportunity to tell us something about you, your achievements, or insight into who you are. So I highly recommend it. Again, this just gives us more opportunity to learn about you and better flesh out who you are as a candidate and how we can see you being a contributing member and student of our respective universities.
So next topic, resume. Some schools require them, other schools have it optional. I recommend you do submit a professional resume if you have one. We don't have a standard or a form it needs to be in, but we do. I suggest it be reverse chronological order, meaning the most recent things first. And you should have dates, and you should include everything. At least for St. John's, there shouldn't be a gap of more than 3 months or more. If there is, you should make a note at the bottom of your resume or include a paragraph addendum about what you were doing during that time. And I would say when people have asked me about it, anything after high school activities don't necessarily need to be on your resume, but anything you did after from maybe 18 years old or on, for our purposes, we want to know about.
I completely agree with everything you said. The only thing I will mention is make sure to provide a bullet point or two for each respective either extracurricular activity or job or internship you're a part of, and especially if you include honors or achievements, because you may know what it means and why you awarded it, but we do not. So it's helpful for us to understand your accomplishments and what you learned in these specific roles that you had.
Good. You want to touch on letters?
Sure. With regard to letters of recommendation, each school is going to have its own specific requirements. How many is a minimum you have to submit to how many is the maximum. At St. John's, is there a minimum number?
Minimum of 2, maximum of 3.
For us, it's a minimum of 1, strongly preferred 2, maximum of 4.
Okay.
And then if you're coming directly from undergrad or maybe just a year removed, I would strongly encourage you getting at least one letter of recommendation from a professor or a TA or someone in an academic setting. And that may change again from institution to institution, but it allows us to kind of assess you based upon your academic rigor and performance, and you're going into another academic setting, which is why we really like to see letters of recommendation from professors. And I know at some larger institutions, you may be in classes with 350 or 400 students where a professor may be difficult to get it from, and a TA may be more applicable. I also think it's nice to have a well-rounded experience, and you may have 1 or 2 professors who you want to write a letter of recommendation for, you went to office hours, you had multiple classes with, but it's nice to hear someone who kind of supervised you or advised you in a different capacity, where a letter of recommendation from a supervisor at an internship or a job experience or a head coach could be helpful.
Yeah, and my only note on letters would be they should all be professional or academic. No personal, really no neighbors or lawyers That's just not helpful for us to know that you're a great next door neighbor.
Judges, senators.
I would say that it's not the title that's going to impress us of the recommender. It's going to be their relationship with you and their ability to tell us about your work product or your ability to be successful in the classroom. So don't try to impress us with who's writing them. We'd rather hear it from the person who knows you better.
Content over title every day.
Do you want to touch on fees or
with regard to application
Yeah.
fees? So different institutions, law schools will charge application fees. Some will waive the fee. For Villanova, we waive the fee for anyone applying to our first year JD program. How about?
We don't charge an application fee to St. John's JD program, so we encourage you to apply. This really ranges, so just research every school you're interested in and ask questions where appropriate. Most schools publish all this on their website, so that should be the first tool you use.
And some schools will offer waivers if you go to a law school fair or forum and you speak to them. Some of them will offer merit or need-based waivers because applying to law school, unfortunately, is expensive. And if you're applying through LSAC, applying to one law school is just over $400. So it can be expensive, so seeking fee waivers or applying to schools to which there are no application fees can be very helpful, especially if you want multiple options.
So a letter of recommendation question, if somebody's been out 3-4 years, is an academic recommendation still helpful or preferred?
It is helpful if you still have a relationship with a faculty member. I generally tell folks that if they graduated several years ago and they just can't find the professors they used to have, maybe they retired, maybe they changed schools, it's okay if you can't provide one, but it's preferred. Many schools use an admissions committee, often made up of faculty, to read some or all of their applications, and faculty love to hear from faculty. So just keep that in mind.
And we actually got the question that you answer at every tabling event, and that is, which is more important, the Lsat or GPA? Do they carry the same weight?
So I'll let us both answer. We don't use a formula for admission here at St. John's. Every school does publish their median GPA and their median Lsat and the middle 50th percentile ranges. I encourage you to look on the website of every school you're interested in and to see where your scores fit within those published ranges. Because we don't use a formula, there's not a certain weight I can tell you that is assigned to it. We're going to review everything in your application. That being said, there are generally certain numbers that may just not be admissible at certain schools. So you can always have a more in-depth conversation with a representative from one of those schools, but try to find several schools you can apply to that your scores are within their range or one of your scores are within their range.
And the common law school answer, it depends. So every candidate's different, and I can go on a limb and probably say this. There are people who apply to both of our institutions who fell well above our 75th percentile who probably got denied. There are people who fell below our 25th percentiles that probably admitted current students at our respective institutions. It is not the end-all, be-all, and don't feel discouraged. I think looking, like Leisha said, at the 25th to 75th percentile gives you an idea as to your just general competitiveness at that institution, but it does not bar you or preclude you from being considered for admission. Because someone applying 10 years out and has a wealth of work experience who maybe they didn't have the best GPA or were immature when they were in going through the undergraduate career, they could be a completely different person today. Thank gosh I am right now. So I say it is it's very specific depending upon the candidate. Just like Leisha said, there's no formula or algorithm that we input these numbers into and spits out a decision.
Good. So I just want to mention before we sign off, because I know our time with you all is limited, every school has different deadlines. We both have rolling admission. Our applications are both live. Here at St. John's, we have a priority application date of March 15th, but we will accept applications after that if space still remains available in the class. But there might be specific programs, like we have early decision programs that do have earlier deadlines, and we have honors programs that do have an earlier deadline as well. So look up every school you're interested in, and I don't know if you want to...
I will just say, when is your early decision deadline?
November 1 and January 7th.
So for us, it's going to be December 1st and then February 15th for early decision. However, we do have a hard deadline to submit your application by April 1st. So because our respective institutions have rolling admissions, we recommend, obviously you want to submit your application when it's stronger. I say a stronger application is better than an earlier application. But if you can submit your application either before the holiday break or before February, that's when most of our seats are available, and you have a better chance of being admitted because we have more offers to give.
Well, we appreciate you listening
Do
today.
you have time for a few more questions?
We do.
I mean,
That's okay with me.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So we have a couple of people tuning in who sound like they're out of school.
Okay.
For a while, 20 years. And so she wants advice about, how do I craft an application if I have a lot of work experience? Another somewhat related question is somebody who's got another graduate degree.
Sure.
So is doing something else like an MBA, et cetera.
Yeah.
How does that factor in? Is that calculated as part of the Lsat GPA? Are you going to ask for that transcript?
Sure. So graduate degrees are not factored into the cumulative undergraduate GPA that we all see and that we all have to report, but we will see your transcript from your graduate program. You are required to submit those as well, and we will examine it carefully because often those graduate work will actually give us a greater insight depending on how long you've been out and what type of program you're in. For folks who really have significant work experience, the letters of recommendation, the personal statement, and the resume are key because those are the areas where you can highlight those things. Here at St. John's, we always have an age range in our entering class. This past year, our youngest student was 20 and our oldest was 50. That's not unusual. I actually met with the 50-year-old student yesterday because he was just telling me about how his first year was going. He had a completely different career before, and that is not unusual. We are used to seeing that, but you should explain it in your application.
Yeah, same. Our age range this past entering cycle was 21 to 44, and we have a student who started at the law school as a first-year student with 6 kids. It's incredible. So my one thing I'll say is that when you graduate from undergrad, your GPA is going to be what your GPA is. Your LSAT is going to be what your LSAT is. So if you have multiple years, 20 years of work experience, all that means is you have a wealth of experience, not just to bring forward to the legal profession, to your JD, but to the classmates as well. These are going to be your colleagues in the future. So we welcome people with wealth experience from different walks of life.
When someone applies, what is typical turnaround time for when they should receive an answer? And it's specifically in the context of if someone applies before an early decision deadline, how long will it be until they hear back?
I mean, every school is going to be different. For us, we're rolling admission, but for early decision, I do wait until I have the whole pool because it's a smaller group and I want to see them all. But otherwise, we make admission decisions here at St. John's from November through April, almost every single week. That being said, how long your application is going to take really depends. It might be a very easy decision and you might hear back in 4 weeks. It might go through lots of rounds of review, or we might be grappling with something, or we might just be trying to see how many seats we think we're going to have available in the class, and it might take longer. We try to tell applicants to expect 8 to 12 weeks, even though we often give decisions well before then. Every school is different, though.
It's almost identical for us.
Okay.
So just to remember, admissions offices, people like myself and Leisha, in addition to our colleagues at other institutions, we're on the road, we're recruiting. So the bulk of our application review is really gearing up towards November and later. And similar to what Leisha said, is similar to what we do at Villanova Law. We'll start doing decisions maybe every week or every other week. And if you are applying early decision, you are guaranteed for round 1, you're guaranteed to receive a decision before the holiday break. And then for round 2 before April 1st, before you have to submit any deposit to any school. So very similar for both of us.
So we got a macro question from Alex. Is there an expectation that there will be an unusually high number of applications this year? And if so, how is that affecting the competitiveness of getting into law school?
So last year there was an increase in applications nationally. There was also specifically within that an increase in higher Lsat test takers. Right now we can't really make predictions. We can only say that because we don't know. We wish we knew all these things. that the number of people who've registered for LSATs for the past few administrations has increased from previous years. So we expect applications will continue to increase. I would use the entering class data from this past year for any school you're interested in to see. I don't expect a dramatic change this year, but I expect a slight increase. So it might be slightly more competitive at some schools, but other places they might have had a dramatic increase.
Yeah, so I will say this, just because I had to give a presentation to our faculty yesterday. So piggybacking on what Leisha said, yes, there was a large increase in total applicants nationwide. So it was roughly around 8.1%, and we're exactly 8.1%. There was just over 4,500 more applicants to law school last year. Now, there's competing theories as to why that is, but it seems though we are getting back to a place where there's more applicants to law school, which means there's going to be more competitive cycles. And like Leisha said, it's not just more candidates applying to law school, but also those with very high LSAT scores. Anywhere from a range of 160 or higher had double-digit growth in increases in test taker volume this past year. The only point I'll caveat with that is that they just released the test taker registration volume for now including June, July, and September, and it's roughly down 3,000, but we don't know how that translates to actual test takes. But compared to 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the pool has increased dramatically.
And it's a little hard to compare LSAT test taking volume from year to year because it used to always be at the same times of year, and this year there were 2 summer LSATs and an early September, and it used to always be a September 30th or early October. So it's not comparing apples to apples this year, which is unusual for us.
And it's going to change again, like you mentioned. There's going to be 9 administrations starting in September 2019.
Yeah.
One more quick GPA question. Can a high graduate GPA make up for a low undergraduate GPA?
So it can't erase it. The low undergraduate GPA will always be reported on your score report, but it will also, every law school any law school you go to will have to report it out to the American Bar Association and U.S. News and World Report and things like that. However, it might make an admissions committee much more confident in admitting you if they've seen that after undergraduate you've performed much better at the graduate level. So it will always be there, but your graduate degree can really help.
100% agree, and just like I've been saying, it depends. So what was the master's degree in? Was it a PhD program? On top of that, how many credits were you taking semester per semester? How long did it take you to finish that master's program? All of these things get factored in, but yes, I think, like Leisha said, it can factor in with a low undergraduate GPA to a very strong performance in a graduate program, especially when faculty members review it. It can help out an admissions decision.
Part-time programs, is it harder, easier, different to get into a part-time or flex program?
So, I mean, it depends. Here at St. John's, we do have a part-time program. It is now a part-time day program, and the credentials are the exact same as for our full-time day program. The only difference is you take less credits per semester, and for our incoming part-time day students, they actually choose their own schedule. So they could do morning only, afternoon only, or 2 full days a week. But it's not, I would recommend it for people who have to work or have a significant commitment outside of law school, because it is a 4-year degree, 4-year program. But it's not easier at St. John's to get in that way. Some schools might be different, so it is a question worth asking. You guys don't have a part-time, right?
We have the traditional 3-year JD program, so I can't speak to this. But I will say it just like Leisha said, it varies institution to institution. Some may want more work experience. Some are okay, especially if you have to work in order to finance yourself or your family. So it's just going to be case by case.
Great. And Regina has a question. Do you have? She got the do nots of the personal statement, and she was hoping that you had a positive spin, specific things you hope to gain from the personal statement. So I think you went through this, but
Yeah.
what are you looking for? And then
Yeah.
you have a couple of tips,
Sure.
positive tips for
Sure.
things people should do.
So I'll jump right in and say, when I'm reviewing a personal statement, I want to learn about the positive attributes and traits that really make you who you are. So when I'm reading a personal statement, some of my favorite are the way you tell a story, and maybe you're a compassionate, empathetic person, you have great leadership skills, you're a hard worker, you have an amazing work ethic, and I want to find out about that, but I don't want candidates to explicitly state that I'm a compassionate, empathetic, hardworking person. So the way you weave that into a story and kind of allow us to infer those qualities about you are the ones that really stand out to me. And I think a lot of times candidates think that they have to have done something revolutionary,
Right.
or you have to save children from third world countries in third world countries, and it doesn't. Some of my favorite personal statements were about a weekend with grandma, or someone going out and doing a hiking trip, or something of the most mundane everyday tasks that we do, but it's the way that you talk about it and the things that you express that really stand out.
And so a lot of times it is telling us something about self-discovery. It's well written, and it's something that we're people, right? We're sitting there, we're reading hundreds of applications maybe in a week or 2 weeks. And so it's something that we should enjoy reading. So show it to your roommate, show it to your sister. Do they enjoy it? Was it a pleasurable 5 minutes of their time?
That's great. Let's do 2 more questions. The first is about transfer to law school. Do you accept transfers? What is that process? Or undergraduate GPA and Lsat scores still factors?
Sure.
Or is performance at the originating institution, all of those types of things? And then the other, back to Lsat and GPA, is if you've got a low GPA, the specific question is, how high an Lsat score do you need? So let's tackle the transfer first.
Sure.
We'll end with the Lsat and GPA, and then if you can give us just a few last-minute
Sure.
tips, and then tell people how they can contact you in the future, that'd be great.
So most schools for transfer applicants are looking for folks who have performed very well during their first year of law school. So I would say for transfer applicants, the most important factors are law school GPA. Most places are still going to look at everything in your application, but it is a little bit easier to overcome some weaknesses if you've already shown that you handled the first year very well and your grades demonstrate that. All schools usually have a detailed transfer application section on their website. Here we're looking for a law school GPA of a 3.0 or better, and I would start there, but you can always schedule an appointment or a phone call with an admissions rep to learn more.
This is the easiest job I have, is following Leisha every time she speaks. It's like, I 100% agree. I would say for us, there's not any, law school GPA to which you have to have in order to apply or be considered for admission. Although having something at a 3.0 or something along the lines of better than 50th percentile of your class can be very helpful when applying. It definitely, I think it's a more weighted factor in your application when it comes to transfer students, your law school GPA, compared to your undergraduate GPA or Lsat, because there's actual first year law school performance.
Do you want to touch on whether there is or is not cutoffs and that sort of thing?
So when approaching the Lsat or the GRE, obviously you want to be shooting for a perfect score. I'm not shooting, if I'm taking the Lsat, to get a 176 or a 142. I'm shooting to get a 180. I'm not looking to get questions wrong. And again, it's not that there's any hard cutoffs or automatic admissions that we give out to anyone who has a certain Lsat or GPA. Obviously, you want to perform to the best of your ability. If you have to retake it, you want to give yourself enough time and be realistic with yourself and say, I studied for 6 months or a year, and this is the score I got. This is exactly what my diagnostic or practice test were saying I was going to get. So just be honest, because it's an expensive test and it's not a fun test to take. So just think about that when applying to schools. And then when you get your score, be realistic and say, like, okay, well, I fall well below this school's 25th percentile. I may have a more difficult chance of, getting admitted, or your score may fall above another school's median, and you might think, okay, well, my chances for admission are a little bit more competitive. So I just say it's very dependent upon where you're looking to apply. So kind of have your LSAT score in mind and look at each school's respective academic GPA and LSAT range.
And we've seen a wide range of candidates get admitted over the years, so there is no hard and fast rules. I will say the number one thing is making sure faculty at our institutions are comfortable with those admission offers. So think about that you always emphasize your strengths in your application and you explain any weaknesses. Some schools might have a hard GPA cutoff. We don't, but we have to have a lot more conversations with faculty and get a lot more people involved if they're worried about someone's academic performance. I really want to thank you all for taking the time to do this. And Matt and I are former colleagues, so it's a treat to get to see him today and to do this. If you have any suggestions on future topics, please just shoot it into the Facebook, and we'd be happy to do this again one day.
Yeah, so thank you as always. And one thing I really recommend is touch base with our offices, find out more about our institutions, and if you can, visit. There's something unique about each law school out there, and I think we very much enjoy our law school communities, and I think you will as well if you have the chance to visit. So, thank you for taking part in this Facebook Live event.
Yep. Bye.
Take care.